The next day, after a late breakfast, Frisk quizzed him on the differences between various herbs and powdered animal bits and their uses. They looked over the list he'd made of new ingredients, going through the recipes and identifying how each item worked in each potion. That was the first time she demonstrated how to mix and infuse something, and the first time she warned him,
"You have to be careful how you feel when you make potions. Intent is always important when you're using magic. You fully intend to cause damage, and I fully intend to protect, which is why we're good at what we do, yes?"
He shrugged philosophically, and she half smiled.
Well, it's similar when you're making something for someone else to take. If you're in a foul mood and you want to cause harm, or you simply don't want the person to get better, you might as well be concocting poison, or giving them water. Of course, your feelings don't matter if you're just throwing herbs into a pot, but these work as well as they do because you're putting a tiny bit of yourself into it. You have to make sure that it's a good bit.
Pretty sure all my bits are bad by now.
Sans remarked.
How about I make some poison instead?
Frisk shook her head, leaning over the table.
No one is all bad, Sans. Here.
She took the glass stirrer out of the miniature cauldron bubbling away in the middle of their workspace.
I'll infuse it now. Watch.
He did observe closely as she bent forward, though probably not the way she'd intended. He just made sure he was looking at the potion when she glanced up at him.
Try thinking of someone you care for, and imagine it's for them.
She opened her hand over the cauldron and, to his surprise, let out a low whistle, piercingly sweet. A mote of light drifted from her palm and settled into the mixture. It seemed to sparkle for a moment, then resumed being a potion. When he concentrated, though, he could feel a little tingle of magic in it.
I won't ask you to try until you have better control of your emotions. Right now you're so angry that I don't know what would happen.
A different note had crept into her voice. Sans shifted his bony weight on the stool.
It's not like I can help it.
Perhaps. You probably don't even notice it anymore. It's become a part of you, through whatever stuff has happened since the humans left the underground. And before you ask, my mother is ill again. We can't speak with her until she's better.
There it was. He'd wondered if she was going to pretend he'd never snapped at her.
Well, you can only ask me so many personal questions before I get touchy, lady. Frisk.
He tapped the work table a couple of times.
Look, I know you have a lot on your plate, and having to deal with me isn't much help. I just want to know, is there any way to tell the others I'm not dead or something? My brother's got to be out of his mind by now, and I don't want someone coming after me and getting caught.
Frisk shook her head, and his soul sank to the floor.
I'm sorry, Sans, but that's out of the question. Our king has forbidden any humans from coming within a day's walk of the entrance to the underground. And let's be very honest. What would happen if a human came up to you out of nowhere and said that they had an important message to give the monsters?
Sans' jaw clenched so hard that the priestess put her hand out, not quite touching his arm.
Sans, please, if there was any way to...
Forget it, okay? Just... never mind.
The skeleton glared at the windows facing out from the workroom. Like everything else in this damn place, they were too small for him to fit more than his head through. He'd gone through this in his own mind a dozen times. Even if he could break through the wood and stone, he could sense the barrier set behind the wall to block his shortcuts. The one along the outside wall was heavier than the ones in the bedroom, which were permeable, purely there to track his movements. It was debatable whether this one could be physically broken with something, but the moment he tried, she would know he was trying and stop him with a stronger barrier. What if he waited till she wasn't here and couldn't get back in time to stop him? If he broke through when she was distracted and far enough away, say, doing her church stuff in the middle of the night, then there wouldn't be much she could do. He could escape and decide later whether he wanted to come back or... Wait, come back? What the hell was he thinking? Why would he choose to be locked up by any human, no matter how pretty and gutsy and sweet and melodic and crap? Anyway, he wouldn't come back. He'd have to be sure to grab his notes and a few books for Alphys. Frisk could always get more copies. He already had plenty to report to King Asgore, though he felt a little uneasy about letting old Gory know that the most powerful barrier-making human was a determined sorceress whose soul could probably make you invincible. Actually, he felt a lot uneasy. Maybe he'd keep that to himself for now. Too bad he couldn't bring her with him.
Sans? Sans?
Frisk was touching his radius. She'd lifted her veil, large brown eyes turned up to his.
Are you all right?
Sans studied her for a long moment, reflecting that Papyrus had always wanted a pet. The idea was more appealing than he'd have liked to admit. He had to dismiss it with a shake of his head, and shake it again to get it loose.
I'm fine, kid. Remind me what this stuff was for?
After all, he thought darkly, pets were too much trouble, especially if you got attached to them. Besides, what would they feed her? A knock on the outer door startled them both. Before Frisk could respond, the door opened, and in strode a tall, thin man in dark robes, holding a box under his arm.
High Priestess. Honored guest.
The man said in a cool, whispery voice, giving them a short bow.
Dr. Sarif, this is a surprise. I wasn't expecting you so early.
The High Priestess responded, replacing the veil as she stood up.
Sans, this is Dr. Sarif, the Royal Sorcerer. Doctor, please meet Sans the Skeleton.
The man regarded Sans with mild curiosity.
I am very pleased to see you again, Sans the Skeleton. Has Her Eminence been treating you well?
Yeah. Do I know you from somewhere?
The Royal Sorcerer bowed again. He was unnervingly pale, the effect enhanced by dark eyes and long black hair framing his face.
I helped transport you from your cell to this room.
It took magic,
Frisk said, helpfully. He'd figured as much. Magic was the only way humans could do any damn thing. The boss monster looked at the box under the doctor's arm, which had a strange feel to it. He couldn't tell what it was, but he knew he didn't like it.
This is for you, as we discussed, Your Eminence. I will leave it in your office.
Frisk looked so uncomfortable that Sans glanced at the sorcerer, but nothing was visibly wrong. The man ignored them both, striding past the table and opening the door to her office. They heard rustling and the doors closing as he stepped back into the workroom.
That'll be all. Good day, my lady. Sans.
With another bow, the doctor turned and left.
Weirdo,
said the 10-foot skeleton. He found he didn't want to look away from the door, lest the guy come back and catch him unawares. He hadn't been very threatening, but something about him was very off.
He's unique.
Frisk sat down again.
Now, this infusion is almost ready. We'll leave it at room temperature for another 10 minutes or so before we stir it again. In the meantime, you can add 2 drops of peppermint oil, mint, orange, or lemon extract.
The rest of the day passed without major incident. Frisk had to stop in the middle of concocting a burn salve and leave Sans to finish it, though she cautioned him not to infuse it yet. She rather envied him. She had to walk to the other side of the castle to go over her parish's monthly accounts, balancing foot-long columns of tiny numbers to check that tithes and alms had come in and gone out properly. They never quite did, though it had gotten better in the past year, as she had made it increasingly clear that she was not interested in stealing from the poor or turning a blind eye to it, even for a few hundred extra dinar in her own column. The attempts at bribery were particularly insulting because she didn't need it. The realm's high priestess was entitled to 0.5% of the church's total monthly income, and through the magic of frugality and compound interest, her personal fortune had grown to the point where she didn't want to use any of it. Life was so strange. As a small child, she had only eaten once every couple of days, and now she could decide not to buy her own estate and maintain a huge staff for it. She was starting to wonder, though, about a rumor she'd heard regarding several hundred acres of land that would supposedly be up for sale in the next few months. They were principally wheat and barley fields, no more than 2 days' walk from the underground's main entrance. That was food for thought, indeed. Frisk eventually finished and stopped by the kitchens on her way back to her room. Sans was still wary of what he ate. She took care to have more than one damned fork now when she tasted his food for him. She wasn't worried for herself. If she didn't have time to eat in the kitchen, she routinely paid several of the staff a bit extra to make sure that everything they brought her had come straight from the pot or the pan, with no chance for someone to add any surprises. That had felt hypocritical at first, but she'd soon realized that she couldn't rely on people's consciences or sense of duty to keep her safe. Many, like the guard captain, were loyal for loyalty's sake, but many more of them needed external motivation, and she was helping the cooks and servers support their families. And she wasn't literally stealing from orphans to do it. An overstuffed basket sat outside her chambers, and the guard hastened to open the door and push it inside for her. Frisk carried the tray to the table, humming the barriers higher and setting the tray by Sans' elbow as he compared nearly identical recipes in 2 separate books. Then she dragged the laundry basket over, pulling a sail-like garment out end over end.
Here you are,
she said around an armful of fabric. The skeleton looked up, scowling at the interruption.
What?
This is for you.
Frisk tried to hold up an enormous shirt, then an enormous set of trousers.
I had them measure your clothes when we washed them for you. They made you another set.
Sans slowly got up and took the shirt from her, holding it against himself. It was sturdy linen, almost as thick as the canvas shirt he wore now, and much softer. The skeleton turned it this way and that, poking the material.
What's this for?
It's a shirt. It goes on the top half of your body. Humans need it for protection against the elements and modesty, but for you, it's principally so that you have a shirt on.
He acknowledged her smartassery with a respectful nod.
I mean, wasn't this a pain to make? I hope nobody expects me to pay for this. Not my fault if what I got on ain't pretty enough for you.
Oh, it was. Getting something that size made up so quickly cost me more than I paid for all the clothes I've had this year combined. But you're not a slave. You're my apprentice. That means you're working for me, and I'm keeping track of your wages. It'll take a while to pay this off, but I think you'll manage it before you leave.
Frisk stuck her arm through one of the trouser legs, flapping it to shake it out. Sans had another odd expression.
You're paying me for the stuff I make? I thought apprentices were the one paying to learn.
I consider the knowledge you'll bring back to the underground to be your apprenticeship fee. And as this arrangement wasn't your idea in the first place, we're bending the rules. I see you've made 3 sets of burn salve, 2 of which look usable, and you're almost done with the cough elixir. Fair market value for those is about 10 dinar total, so minus the infusion I'll do for you, you've earned about 7 already.
He scratched the side of his head.
What am I paying you for my food?
Frisk laughed, shaking out the other leg.
The pleasure of your company.
At his blank stare, she shook her head and uncovered the tray.
No one charges their apprentice for room and board, Sans.
The priestess put down the trousers, picked up the fork, and leaned in for a bite of baked fish. The skeleton pulled the tray away, making her stab the table instead.
If I owe you money, you're definitely not gonna poison me.
He pointed out, and began shoveling it in.
You're right.
Frisk said gravely, trying and failing to hide her grin.
I'm glad you've had time to mull it over.
Sans pounded the table with his free fist, rattling the glass vials.
Might as well, just for the hell of it, right?
She covered her mouth with the back of her hand.
That was weak. Think of a better one and let me know.
You're right,
he said, and waited for her to take a bite before he added,
we really need to scale back.
They had to stop laughing long enough to eat. By the time dinner was over and Frisk had carried the dishes out, both were relaxed enough to be sleepy.
I don't know why I keep wanting to go to bed. All I've done is read and catnap.
Mumbled Sans, trudging into the bedroom and flopping onto the mattress.
I'm not even using my damn magic.
You're eating human food, so your body is getting more nutrition and working harder to process it.
Frisk pointed out, settling into her chair.
Mother said the humans all had to eat more to stop being hungry underground.
She tried not to burp out loud.
Besides, you're probably still recovering from the energy you spent being captured and then trying to kill me. Thrice.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
The skeleton stretched all the phalanges of his toes, flexing them in turn.
Probably won't do it again.
He added truthfully.
Thank you.
Frisk also stretched her legs out, Sans noticing how absurdly tiny her feet were as she got up from her chair with the recipe book. She reached down to dog-ear the page they were on.
Well,
He whisked the book out of her hand and flipped it open to smooth the page out,
Use a bookmark, woman! What are you, some kind of barbarian?
It's an old book. They're all creased anyway.
She argued, trying to take it back. He held it over his head, roughly a mile out of reach.
All right then, fine.
She said with a smirk.
I'm going to take a bath. Read through and find 5 more ingredients to discuss when I get back.
She shut the door on quiet skeletal griping, smiling to herself. The next day passed in a similar fashion, at least outwardly. Frisk took careful note of everything Sans made, ignoring his suggestion to dock him the price of the ingredients when he screwed up. Luckily, he was catching on fast, even if she wouldn't let him infuse anything yet. She also wouldn't tell him how much his new clothing had cost, saying only that she'd let him know when he broke even. What really got his attention was her adding,
If you make enough money, we'll send a few bushels of wheat back with you. No one can be upset that you were gone for so long if you come bearing gifts, can they?
Sans was glad he didn't have facial muscles or anything similar to betray his inner turmoil. He'd had a lot of second thoughts last night about bashing his way out of here, due in small part to the new outfit and the possibility of bringing food to the underground, but mostly because she was working her brain magic on him again, being attractive and kind and easy to talk to, like the terrible sadistic person she was. Not. She was not remotely terrible or sadistic, and that was the problem. He still didn't understand it, or how it was getting worse so much quicker than he'd anticipated. He just wanted to get away before she entangled him any further. Then he'd started thinking of Snowdon right before he fell asleep, and for the first time since he'd been captured, he had dreamed of home. He dreamed their house was cold and dark, with no one upstairs, and a single light on in the kitchen. A female form was silhouetted in the kitchen doorway, hands on hips, facing something slumped over the side of the couch.
Come on, Pap. He's probably just out on another hunting trip,
she argued.
Is that supposed to make me feel better?
The thin nasal voice hurt Sans' soul, and not just because he desperately wanted to hear it again. This wasn't his boisterous, indomitable, recklessly cheerful brother. This was a small, heartsick papyrus, one Sans hadn't seen or heard in a long, long time. The last time it happened, at least Sans had been there for him. Now Sans was gone too.
Hunting animals, Papyrus. He's hunting animals, not humans.
The woman thumped the wall for emphasis, knocking little bits of plaster from the ceiling. Damn it, Sans had told her to quit doing that.
That's gotta be it. We don't eat humans, and he knows how bad the food situation is, right? So...
I don't care what he's doing. Well, not much.
The skeleton heaved a sigh, raising his face from the couch cushion.
Undine, I can't reach him. If he's all right, where is he?
And then something had seeped out of the darkness and gently enclosed Sans' mind, blotting out the dream like a sponge on spilled water. He had woken up knowing that it wasn't a dream and was instantly enraged. He'd been so grateful that the nightmares had stopped, and too damn stupid to figure out that she'd set a barrier up against external influences, including dreams shared with Pap. He'd ponder the full ramifications of it blocking nightmares another day. The memory of his brother's expression had decided him. Agreement or no agreement, he was getting out of here tonight. Of course, he couldn't pack up the stuff he needed before their lesson was done, or right afterward. He wasn't worried about giving himself away. As an accomplished bullshitter, he knew he was behaving perfectly normally. The moment dinner was cleared away, he called dibs on the bathroom, which had a nice, huge tub that he wanted to use one more time. When he was done and she'd gone in and locked the door, and after the usual stab of curiosity as to what she looked like outside of clothes, Sans quietly put everything he wanted into a satchel he'd found under the work table and stowed it behind the door in the bedroom, where he had to wait until she was done getting dressed. The one odd thing was that after she emerged from her dressing room in her full priestessy regalia, she went into her office and spent a few minutes doing nothing that he could hear, after which she was wearing a different brooch. She'd had a white one on the first day they met, but this one shone with a grayish light under her veil.
Going so soon?
He asked carelessly. It was 10 o'clock. She smiled.
If my duties only included saying words in a few songs, I would sleep much easier. There's always someone to speak to before and after services.
Gotcha. Well, have fun. I'm gonna read something with a damn bookmark before I go to bed. Oh, I forgot to ask. Mind if I try to make a few things while you're not here?
Go right ahead. You'll pay for it if you burn down my workroom, so I'm trusting you to behave.
Was he imagining a weird little inflection there? No, she looked totally wonderful. Normal. She looked totally normal.
Good night, Sans,
she said, adjusting her veil.
Good night, Frisk.
He stretched out on the bed as she shut the door. That was it then. He might not ever see her again. It wasn't a good feeling. In fact, it felt pretty bad. Time to quit feeling it, think of Pap, and focus on his plan of action. The plan. Well, for starters, it would be dumb to try breaking out immediately. He wished he knew exactly where the chapel was. He'd heard occasional church types singing off in the distance, but that didn't give him an idea of how far away she'd be during the service, or for exactly how long. Instead, he watched the clock and fidgeted, as nervous as the first time he'd faced down a group of human sorcerers. Maybe this was a dumb idea. Maybe he should just ask her to take down the barrier, keeping him from dreaming with Papyrus, just for one night. She was too kind to refuse, and intelligent enough to ask him for more information in exchange. Frisk knew he used to be a normal monster, and might think to ask if he'd always been able to speak across dreams. It wouldn't be too far a stretch for her to keep questioning how he became a boss monster. She'd also realized that if she let him communicate with other monsters, he could tell them several things that she would prefer they not know, including her identity and full capabilities. It was one thing for her to take a calculated risk and let him go back to the underground with that information, or, much more likely, to make him forget it before he left. Some humans had the ability to excise bits of memory like that. It'd be another thing entirely to permit a conversation that no one else could even hear. She was nice, not stupid. So Sans waited until 11:45, and then he sat in the workroom with the satchel looped around his wrist for another 10 minutes, nerves humming. Then he got up, went to the double doors leading out of her rooms, and silently picked up a 7-foot decorative statue standing at the room's threshold, wedging it inward across the doorframe. He went back to the workroom, judged the weakest place in the outside wall, reared back, and slammed his fist directly between two of the windows. Frisk had started to relax as the organist began playing, and incense floated in the chapel air. She was opening her mouth for the first hymn when a warning note sounded in the back of her mind. The barrier to her workroom's outside windows was tingling, and then it suddenly burned away, the warning note sliding all the way up to a full-blown klaxon. She gritted her teeth so hard that it hurt, controlling her expression with a supreme effort as the voice in her head screamed,
Sans, you two-faced sack of fertilizer.
The only good thing about this situation was that she wasn't leading this service. Therefore, it was odd, but not completely conspicuous, when she stepped to the back of the choir, touched her new brooch, and vanished.